Okay, hello friends. We are live at the Democratic Socialist Convention here in Chicago, joined by Emmett Rensin, writer, all-around journalistic impresario, and does all kinds of things. He wrote a piece that I thought was relevant in terms of feeding into certain themes that we see on display at this convention. The piece was published at The Outline, which is a relatively new media outfit, and it is entitled "The Real Fascists Are the Friends We Made Along the Way." So we will, of course, link to that piece in the description box. So click on it and read it. I know reading is considered somewhat gauche among some, but you should read it. So anyway, hello, Emmett.
Hey.
So basically, just if you wouldn't mind, like outline what are your overall. We'll get into the piece momentarily, but what overall themes have you gleaned from this convention experience thus far?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, obviously, this is by far the biggest convention DSA has ever had. We've jumped enormously, 10 times in membership in the last year or 18 months. And I'm a delegate here from Iowa City. I think it's good. I mean, I think, a lot of people had different worries going into the convention. How well can an organization that's been fueled hugely online and with a lot of young people transition into serious political work? How's the capacity going to work when this organization isn't used to having this many people? Is it going to be totally tedious? Go too far the other way, be hugely tedious. I think it's been really great so far. There's a lot of energy here. I think the organizers have done an excellent job setting it up. And it's hit the right balance, right? It has been there's a deep seriousness to it, even amongst people who I think have no real previous experience doing this, except for maybe their DSA local, who are just being acquainted for the first time, and I think really well with okay, this is what the work looks like, though. We have to think about budgets, we have to think about media stuff. It's not just what's our core message, although that's important, but how do you really, build and then grow a political organization? But at the same time, it's been fun. People I think are having a good time. They're meeting people, which even if you know people online and stuff, there is a huge value to just meeting organizers and other people who you share political affinities with in person and building those relationships. And it's been a little messy, like any sort of convention. There, snafus.
There was a little bit of tedium yesterday with the procedural measures, but it got resolved relatively quickly.
But I think it was the right amount. I think there should be a little bit of tedium. You should say, okay, It's not always going to be fun to build socialism. A lot of this is thankless hard work. And so
strictly following the Roberts rules isn't always pleasurable.
Yeah, a little bit of tedium, a little bit of kind of sloppiness and fun and freewheelingness. And I actually think, I'm not saying this just shilling for the DSA here. I am as you know, a cynic about a lot of things and a contrarian about a lot of things. But I came here looking for stuff to be they're not doing this right. But it's actually, I think, been totally great so far.
Yeah, I have certain contrarian instincts as well, although I don't necessarily love that term. But my kind of sense coming into into this convention is to kind of set that aside and just give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Just because I'm almost inclined to do that with any group organizing outside the two-party system at this point.
Sure.
So even if there are some, snafus along the way, I'm willing to kind of give people a pass.
Yeah, and I think it's been good. I mean, this is something I deal with even in Iowa City with new members coming in the organization, right? If everything's working perfectly, there's never anything controversial, nothing ever even, then you're not trying hard enough and your group isn't diverse enough. You want some disagreement internally. You want things, when something slips up a little bit and you got to catch yourself and keep going, that means your organization's ambitious.
Yeah.
So it's good. I think it's good to sort of, you want that, and I think it's healthy. There's a healthy amount of it, and that's what's here.
You mentioned that you were heartened by the idea that a lot of people who are here seem to be treating it like very serious political work. I'm sort of wondering if that is a departure from how we tend to look at the DSA's online presence, which is characterized by a lot of irony, a lot of jokes, a lot of memes. That can be a little controversial in some quarters because there's this idea where you're in this constant, never-ending loop of irony. What are your actual political convictions at a certain point? Does that sensibility sort of dissipate when you're in real life political setting, or is there still traces of that are apparent?
Well, look, there's a culture, and I think it's healthy to have a culture. But, look, first of all, and I don't think there's an easy answer to the online versus doing the real work stuff, because look, the online stuff has been essential to growing the organization, to like just getting us out as for being the largest socialist organization in the United States. That said, a lot of the people who someone will say to them like, "Oh, you're just online, you post all the time," like they're back in their local chapter, somewhere in New York, Chicago, East Bay, but also Iowa City, North Texas, out in Oklahoma somewhere, doing really serious and good work. And of course, like, if you're
by the way, we're talking to one of the organizers from Fargo, North Dakota, in a little bit. So
yeah, who I'm sure is doing good work. Part of the thing is like, if you're the people who write about DSA and frankly these sort of like condescending pieces you get sometimes, like what they see is people being like disrespectful to them on Twitter. They don't, no reporter. Well, some reporters will. There are excellent reporters, but most of these people aren't like going to go out to North Dakota and see someone like working on a wage issue or a housing issue. Right. So I think like the organization is vastly more serious than like you'd get the sense you'd get from just reading Twitter. I mean, thankfully, no one's on Twitter, and two, the places where we want to make, we're not fighting for the respect of like centrist journalists.
Right.
We're fighting for the respect and the solidarity of communities.
Right.
Where our locals are, and I think we're doing a good job of that. But yeah, also people have come here and. I think there is something very powerful about seeing all of the people and saying, "Oh, this isn't just on my phone. This is real. Right. This is a bunch of people, and we all want something. It helps that the message is something that we want. This isn't just like a power for power's sake type of organization, right? No matter how you do that, and how much work you do, and how much online you do, and whatever, you're here because you want like to give material dignity to all people, to see an end to sort of needless depravity and violence in the world, to." Bring about socialism, to bring about a productive apparatus in society that is dedicated to giving people what they need to live full, dignified lives, as opposed to just endlessly growing capital forever.
Right. It's funny because in 2015, I was involved in helping to organize a book tour for this gentleman who wrote a comprehensive history of socialism in America and looked at all the socialist elected officials in all of these various localities throughout the centuries. And part of that book tour entailed going to various DSA events.
Yeah.
And comparing my perception of those events, and it was only 2 years ago, to now is just, it couldn't be more of a stark difference. I mean, the chapters that I visited then were very pleased if somebody under 30 showed up like every 6 months. I mean, they're older people who had just been around and had sort of this institutional attachment to the organization, and now you have definitely a much different sense in terms of how people think about their place within the organization.
Yeah, well, look, DSA has, in theory, been around for a long time and has done great work in the past, and there have been upticks and downticks. This is certainly our biggest upsurge ever. And look,
I saw Joan Walsh question if it actually was the biggest upsurge ever.
I don't know where she's getting her numbers from, but it is. Okay. But
fact check.
Look, there have been larger, like the Socialist Party of the United States was larger, in the early 20th century. But this is the largest, since World War II, socialist organization.
Definitely the rate of increase of membership has been by far
enormous. Look, and I've been to DSA meetings back, just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when it was smaller organization, older organization, and there's nothing wrong. Look, a lot of our older members, are like more committed to this and have been in it longer than anyone who's in their 20s or younger could just possibly be in virtue of how long they've been alive. Right. And a lot of these people like possess know-how and institutional knowledge and memories of like previous successful work that I wasn't alive for. And I think they've all been thrilled. When I was out right after the election, I was out in Los Angeles and visited the DSA Los Angeles chapter, and I can't, unfortunately, remember the name of the woman who was in charge. She was an older woman who had been with the party really since the beginning, had been running DSA LA forever. And I was talking to her, and she said, everyone's really bummed out about the election, and I am too, but really I haven't had time to be that bummed because suddenly there's 200 people showing up, and they're young, and they want this, and I'm thrilled. I've been waiting for years for this. And I think there's been productive things that have come out of the sort of fusion of sort of old institutional knowledge and more like committed lifelong activists than just having this huge injection of young blood. It'll hopefully themselves one day to grow up to be like older and seasoned activists with that kind of institutional knowledge.
Now that's a good segue into an element of your piece that I referenced at the beginning, because I think you really adeptly describe a phenomenon that I think has been one of the dominant phenomena since the election, maybe even dating back earlier, but definitely since January 20th. One thing that you see on the center left, broadly construed,
Sure.
is this attempt to kind of cloak their attempts at rehabilitation and self-absolution in the lexicon of radicalism.
Yeah.
So and I think you used the phrase, they use this scolding and anti-fascism rhetoric to kind of present themselves as much bolder and more subversive than they ever really planned on being.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, if you see if that dynamic in any way bears on what is going on here. I mean, these are actually people who are doing real work rather than just scolding people who use the wrong terminology.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you have to keep in mind that, look, there are plenty of people who are sort of more notional liberals or center-left people who are doing good and real work. They're not typically the people with sort of well-salaried media jobs who have appointed themselves to resistance.
Think tank sinecures.
Yeah, and there's a certain extent to which, there's a centrist move to just sort of take a really moderate position and then just phrase it extremely aggressively and say that equals radicalism. And I think what I said about scolding Antifa stuff was that, these are people who hate, this sort of self-styled resistance, who hate Trump, but also hate the Antifa, right? They'll get mad at the black bloc people and stuff. And there's something very weird about, what I think I say in the piece is that, hating a pretty widely hated, reactionary, incompetent president and also hating radicals somehow makes you metaphorically a successor to the people who, risked death to blow up Nazi train depots and stuff, I mean, stuff I would talk about before the election too. When
we talked about this during even the Republican primaries. I remember there were people who would shut down Trump rallies.
Yeah.
And the people who were declaring Trump a fascist, who had to be stopped at all costs, were also criticizing people who were actually employing anti-fascist tactics, and there was some disconnect there that was never reconciled.
Right, and I don't think Trump is a fascist. I think, frankly, fascists are generally more competent than that. But the whole thing of he's Hitler. Okay, we did something about it. And it's no, we just meant share our hot takes more. As the response to that, which is if the guy's Hitler, that justifies all sorts of extreme political responses that I don't think are justified at present because I don't think he's Hitler.
Right.
But if he were, I mean, if Jeb Bush can get on board with go back in time and kill baby Hitler, but he's a fascist. Oh no, don't throw an egg at somebody at a rally. That's unacceptable. It's incoherent, and it is and I write about this all the time. The sort of, what I've called the smug style at times, what I've called the liberal superego. This just sort of censorious impulse where the real issue is that the 70 years of sort of liberal technocracy running the world, and especially then in the last 30, 40 years since the 70s when you get into the there's no alternative era and the kind of neoliberal consensus, the political function of power, going from your sort of center-left think tanks over to their official rivals on the center-right. So, everywhere from Neera Tanden to David Frum, who have many disagreements, but they're
all good friends, by the way. They all have drinks.
Yeah, their collective function, right, is to sort of maintain power and hegemony over politics, which makes sense. Can't blame them for that. They got power. They want to keep power. They
to
probably
stigmatize opinions that fall outside their kind of spectrum that they've settled on.
Right. I mean, this is not a new. This goes back to the Noam Chomsky stuff about allowing vigorous debate within very narrowly constrained boundaries, and I think they are starting to notice. And I by no means think liberalism is dead on the doorstep right now. But it's starting to crack. That on all sides of them, that sort of narrowly circumscribed set of boundaries is failing, and you see that with the far right, and you see it with the far left, and I think their impulse into sort of playing whack-a-mole, go smack Trump, then go back and smack the Antifa people, is just to keep everyone in their corners. It's
poke Bernie in the eye every once in a while.
Yeah, it's like Thermidorian basically. It's okay, we're all just going to calm this down now and keep everyone in line. And I get why they do that. I mean, I don't think it's evil exactly. I just think it's, I'm a materialist. I think that's, power preserves itself. Capital protects itself. The government is a, committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. All makes sense to me, but I think they're starting to panic a little bit. And that's why you see things like those disingenuous horseshoe, the far right and the far left are the same stuff, because in their mind they are. Because in their mind it doesn't really. Because you on one hand you want to say, okay, on one side there's the guys who want to put people in camps, and on the other side the guys who are saying, hey, let's give everyone food and medicine. But if you occupy a certain perch, that all just sounds like childish, threatening nonsense that you don't want to deal with, so it becomes the same to you.
Yeah. Your piece really brought me back to the height of the election furor because I can remember vividly being pretty vehemently attacked for gently claiming that Trump might be bad in a whole host of respects, but probably wasn't a fascist, or probably didn't have the capacity to actually institute a fascist government. So if you create an image of Trump that puts him in those terms, you're probably working against a sort of phantom enemy, and that's going to have sort of like a boomerang effect on your tactics and maybe create a little bit of a distortion. And there was a whole genre in the liberal commentariat going back to the election about how Trump is a literal fascist. And, I don't think that, for all the problems that we're living under right now, a gathering like this probably couldn't happen if the United States was being run by a fascist government.
Well, right, we would have been black-bagged and killed. Yeah. But, no, it creates a lot of problems. I mean, it creates, first of all...
But it was seen as totally unacceptable and even pro-Trump somehow if you said, hey, Trump equals bad, but Trump maybe not equals fascist.
Right. I mean, I think there are a couple things there. Like, one, Trump is an idiot, and the people he is surrounded by are idiots. So, I think if you come into office and you were handed back-to-back humiliating defeats by first your judicial branch, then by your legislative branch, and then you're being investigated by the state police of your own government, you're not about to pass an enabling act. Like, you just don't have that capacity.
I don't think. I think.
But
you're basically
also,
right.
I think he's also just a grifter, right? Like, I don't think. I don't think that our center liberals also read Hannah Arendt very well, but I don't think Trump could read Hannah. He's not interested in that kind of stuff. In some ways makes him more dangerous, but in some ways makes the fascist stuff a problem. And I think the two real things that happen, one of which I talk about in the piece and one of which I don't, is one, it does create these incentives for people in the center to play up actual fascists. So you just get those endless pieces about alt-right people and Spencer, and those guys are shitty, but they're
like a dozen guys on Twitter.
Yeah, but they're not there are probably more journalists who show up to every Milo Yiannopoulos press conference than are at this convention.
There are a handful here.
Thousands of people are here. I mean, we got some national press people here, but so there's this incentive to play up these utterly marginal real fascists who, while scary bad people, don't possess very much political power.
And can I just offer a theory as to why it is that I think journalists would be much less inclined to show up at an event like this than they would an alt-right event? I think it's because journalists in general tend to view left populism as a lot less interesting than right populism, because right populism right populism is this sort of exotic phenomenon that they can sort of go on a safari and cover as voyagers into this kind of unseemly realm, whereas left populism, a lot of journalists share at least broadly a lot of the just general goals of left populism, so they don't view it as anywhere near as scintillating.
Oh yeah, well you go see the alt-right, they're outlandish and they're also believe horrifying evil things. I mean, here it's just a bunch of fairly normal people who think we should have more medicine and food. That's not as exciting to cover. I think it's better for people. I think it's a vastly stronger current in American politics right now, and one that, has a mass appeal. And eventually, when we have more power, the dams will break and the coverage will come. And it's already starting to come. I mean, DSA gets way more attention than it ever did, previously. But I was going to say the other thing that I think that the fascist stuff does, and this is what I talk about in the piece, is the resistance stuff, right? I think its primary function is to just collapse all political questions, get rid of any question about politics that isn't are you a Nazi or are you resisting the Nazis?
Right.
And it creates this fantasy world where you're in a final apocalyptic battle with the Trumpenreich, and on the other hand, you're the guys with the good takes who are going to point out that they read Arendt or whatever. And I think it's really cynical. I mean, I don't know consciously or not, but its actual function, right, is to quash dissent on the left and to say that questions like how did we get here, should we radically change our strategy, are we doing something wrong, aren't useful or even perhaps counterproductive questions to ask. And it's not that, you go ask a centrist, they'll say, of course we should have debate, and we'd love to have, but it's always, we'll have debate on your terms. You don't ever get to compromise up if you're on the left. And for, by the way, a faction that gets accused of not wanting to compromise all the time, I don't speak for DSA here, which is a multi-tendency organization, but I want to nationalize all essential industries tomorrow, like even Bernie Sanders, who I'm a great fan of, but who is far to my right, like I feel like I went a long way compromising in 2016. I said, okay, I'll take the kind of imperialist, social democrat.
No, I just think,
fine.
he has no issue with drone strikes, but no, he's the best we have.
Yeah, but no, I think it creates this sort of thing where you can tell yourself that you're just standing up to the Nazis, and that's why anyone who's questioning your motives or even just questioning your approach and your strategy is somehow treasonous. And sometimes that can get really hysterical, like the people who think literally everyone online who doesn't agree with them is a Russian paid agent,
Yeah.
in which case, Putin owes me enormous amounts of money that I've never received. But
I keep waiting for the check to arrive.
yeah, but also, I think it's totally human, right? I get why people do it. You have people who have spent their whole lives believing that they represent the leftmost political possibility in the American mainstream, and suddenly all these kids are telling them that they're not good enough. And they worked all those years to get into high ranking. If I'm Nero, right? I don't dislike Nero really. I totally get it. It was probably took a lot of hard work and smarts and stuff to get to the top of CAP, and now a bunch of teenagers are telling you that you suck. I totally get why that would suck. And I also completely believe that DSA has 25,000 people, and even if we got everyone who voted for Bernie Sanders, we had 15 million people. That's still not enough to win or really take power. We're going to need a lot of these sort of liberals and centrists. Now, what I'll say is we don't need their leaders. We'd love to have them. Anyone wants to defect over to DSA, that's their choice.
Right.
But we need their people, so we do have to appeal to those
If
people.
you're talking about rural
important.
constituencies, you might even need some kind of, conservatives in the sense of having a conservative temperament, maybe not being fully on board with all the latest social issues, but are on board with an economic populist program and who
Sure.
can be persuaded to join a socialist
Sure.
formation.
I don't think personally, I don't think that the left should compromise on social stuff. I just don't think it's in our interest to
No,
compromise
I'm not
on
arguing
any
for
of,
that.
on any of that stuff. But I think it's hilarious, by the way, the Democratic Party, accused us of not caring about anything but class and are now saying, well, but pro-life candidates, that's fine, which I don't think we should compromise on. But, and I'm shocked I always have to make this argument to capitalists, I think people probably respond to things that are in their material best interests. They can be incentivized
Shocker.
by
Shocker.
money. And I think, look, the Democratic Party is already full of, sort of social reactionaries, but who, for whatever reason, prefer democratic economic policies. Our economic policies are even better. At a certain point saying, yeah, we're not going to come to your town and, run our campaign on some, sort of liberal social issue. We're not going to compromise on that. You ask us, we'll tell you where we stand. But our main message here is, look, you're being exploited. More and more of the productive labor you do is being taken away from you and given to wealthy people who don't care about you. You deserve more. You deserve more resources, more dignity, more time with your kids, your family. That's the message. And again, I'm shocked that capitalists do not believe me when I say this, but if you tell someone we will give you more money and stuff and your life will be better, I think they're inclined to agree with that. They're inclined to come along.
Yeah. The frenetic pace of politics and media at this point, I think, is driven in large part by that binary you identified, meaning all political questions now are collapsing into this Nazi versus anti-Nazi kind of paradigm. And that's, I think, is an indication of why the Russia narrative is so potent for a lot of people whose sole and unabiding objective is to simply depose Trump, whatever the cost, because that's...
Yeah,
and they view the Russia story as the only available vehicle to actually ridding the country of him, and that I think has created a lot of warped mentality.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a little depressing that the Democratic Party's most achievable political victory on the horizon is making Mike Pence the president of the United States. But yeah, look, the Russia, I get it. And I get why it disturbs people, and I can do the whole pedantic history rant about how, I totally believe Russia, actively attempted to meddle in our election, but only for the reason that, all major powers incessantly attempt to meddle in each other's elections. I know for a fact that there are people, you ask someone in the street in Russia, they'll say, well, I hope we did it. I'm glad we finally got him, and on certain level, look, it should be looked into. I'm not against, the Mueller investigation, and I think that's all valuable to get out on the open. On the other hand, I do think, it psychically lets people avoid hard questions like, how did Donald Trump get so close? Being an idiot that, a Russian disinformation campaign was easier to come by than like 20,000 votes in Wisconsin or something. Like there's a if that can win, like I'm sure they tried it in 2012 too, but somehow that wasn't a problem for Obama.
But an ancillary effect of the dominance of this narrative is that because there are so many people who feel that all of politics should be about following intensely every little development every single day, that kind of saps energy that might be directed elsewhere, such as to an event like this where you're actually organizing for a longer term objective. I just think that because you made it, you call it this high espionage drama. I mean, espionage dramas are exciting and thrilling, and you want to follow every in and out of them. And I think just the dominance of it in that respect has probably diverted energy that might again have been devoted elsewhere.
Yeah, no, certainly. And look, like an example of that would be like on protecting the ACA, which was protected in large part by the like dedicated work of all kinds of activists all over the country coming to Washington, calling their senators. DSA was involved in that. I mean, we had people arrested on Capitol Hill. But at the end of the day, like, the Democrats did their duty and obviously voted no on repeal. But frankly, like, that was stopped by one, activists from the left and from the grassroots, and two, by Republicans who didn't want to vote for. Like, and I think maybe, thankfully... It was
stopped by the whims of John McCain. Who
right. Well, on some level, I think the activism got him to the point where it was one vote. And then John McCain decided that, like, his ego is more beholden to, like, mainstream hagiography than conservative hagiography. And, like, that's why millions of people get to keep their health care.
Yeah, he was just dreaming of those op-eds that would be...
praising him.
Lauding him. So I think that... probably covers what I wanted to cover.
Cool, great.
Any concluding thoughts?
No, unless you've been thinking about joining the DSA, you should go online right now and become a dues-paying member. I'm obligated to say here as a delegate, but it is a good idea, and we're growing. And I think what's going on here this weekend is great and very encouraging.
Yeah, and again, for me, it's always sort of heartening to be witness to organizing that goes on outside of the two-party system and actually in active opposition to the two-party system. So in that sense, I look with fondness at everything that's going on here. So follow Emmett on Twitter, Emmett Rensin. Read that latest piece, and he has many other articles that you can read at your leisure. So that'll do it.